I became really interested in the idea of multiples and started investigating intaglio, printmaking, lithography, and silkscreen, and decided to settle on intaglio. And my husband and I went to Anderson Ranch. Part of the motivation behind this is that each of my pieces takes so long to complete that I liked the idea of the possibility of doing multiples. But then as I began visiting independent print studios and other places that were doing interesting things with printmaking, I realized that I really wanted to work in experimental printmaking as an art in and of itself, and not just for the idea of the fact that I could create multiples. So Bob and I decided to take a 2-week course with Art Werger at Anderson Ranch in Snowmass, Colorado, and it was one of the most incredible experiences of our life. Bob had decided that he wanted to work with me as the technical person, and of course I would be the artist doing the drawing, etc. on the plates, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful partnership. So we went to Anderson Ranch, which was just an incredibly stimulating period for us. That 2 weeks was very intense, a huge learning curve. And like the people that we are, we came back in and jumped right in, found a friend who had been a master printmaker at Graphic Studio, and purchased his huge, oversized American French tool press. And since my studio was on the 3rd floor, there was no room for it, nor could the floor handle the weight, so we decided to convert our garage into a print shop, which then the hurricane season of 2004 came roaring in. Bob had pretty much set the print shop up in the garage, and it ended up being a storage repository for all of our things as we battened down the hatches for Hurricane Charlie. We went through the eye of Hurricane Charlie, and I spent that summer pretty much trying to survive hurricanes. We were repairing the damage on our house, and I spent any free time I had up in the studio and began a series of drawings called the Staghorn series, as that was all I had time or energy to do, was drawing. That Staghorn series was the beginning of my printmaking. We decided to move to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we loaded everything up, including our 3,500-pound press, and moved to the beautiful new studio that we now have in Santa Fe. Bob proceeded to set up a wonderful print shop with an oversized soaking tank and oversized hot plate so that I could pursue my penchant for working large in printmaking, as I have in all the other media that I've tackled. We tried to make our studio as green as possible, since printmaking traditionally can be fairly toxic with a lot of use of chemicals. We use ferric chloride and other very inert substances to do the etching that are pretty much totally green. The only time I use nitric acid, which was traditionally used for etching in printmaking, is when we do spit bite. And I put the respirator on, and I used it in a plate called Youth, and you can see the nitric sizzling on the copper plate. It's quite exciting, but we don't do too much of that. The other challenge that we found in printmaking is the whole idea of additioning, and that is Bob's job. He creates the multiples. I work the plates, create the images, and then he takes on the additioning. Most of our editions have been editions of 30, but we expect to start working with editions of 10 to 15. I'd also like to start experimenting with monoprinting, which is something that appeals to a lot of us painters. I've always had an incredible fascination with color, and doing these abstractions has given me an incredible opportunity to just play with pure color. I love these oil pastels, going into the art supply store and picking out colors and palettes. Such an easy, free medium, too, where I don't have to deal with solvents and things like that and just start drawing. Another thing that's been really interesting for me as I start working abstractly is that I'm finding and even sometimes when I'm doing my realist drawings, I've always been left-handed, but I'm starting to find myself working with my right hand, and sometimes on a drawing when I'm doing shading, I'll even have a piece of graphite in both hands working at the same time. There's something very, very stimulating and exciting about that. A very free feeling to it for me. just sort of happened inadvertently. It wasn't anything I planned or thought about, and then suddenly I realized I was doing it. So pretty much, practically everything I'm doing now is based around drawing and scratchboard, which really is a form of drawing. And I think it's the printmaking that really took me back to drawing, which I absolutely passionately love. I realized I'd been concentrating more on painting for all these years. And I would always sit when I was on the phone or anything and do these abstract doodles. I've just pages and pages covered. I couldn't stop doing it. And I've noticed recently that I'm not doing those anymore because I'm doing drawing. It was like the drawing was just yearning to come out. The use of a pencil or pen or whatever on these panels is just a part of my spirit, I guess, something that just had to come out of me. I've always been fascinated with science and botany and probably would have become a scientist if I hadn't chosen the arts. And actually, years ago, my grandmother had told me that she and my grandfather were convinced I was going to become a botanical illustrator. But then they realized that the tightness of botanical illustration and having to render something so perfectly was really not what enticed me. It was the whole wonderful forms in nature. So I see that theme over and over again. I keep going back to plants and the wonderful sculptural convoluted forms that nature has and interpreting them in with my own voice.